Hello, welcome to Vrijim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 105 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll discuss about adding and using user controls on a web form, adding properties to the user control. In part 104 of this video series, we have discussed about creating user controls. If you haven't watched that, I would strongly encourage you to do so before continuing with the session. In fact, if you remember, in the previous session, we have created this calendar user control. Now, let's say I want to use this user control on this webform 2.aspx. Now, let's say we want to capture the date of birth of a person, so I'm going to have the static text date of birth. And now, using a user control on a web form is simple and straightforward. All we have to do is simply drag the user control from the Solution Explorer and drop it on the web page. And that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. So I am in the source mode of this web form, and then I'm going to drag and drop this user control onto this web form. Now look at this. It has actually added a link to the user control. Now this is not what we have expected. Okay, so let me get rid of this hyperlink from there. Let me flip the web form to the design mode, and then let me drag and drop this user control. Alright, now it's working as expected. So when you drag and drop the user control from the Solution Explorer onto the web form, then make sure you are on the design mode. Otherwise, it may not work as expected. Alright, so when we added this user control to the web form, what actually happened behind the scenes? Two things. First, it has added this register directive. Second, it has added this control declaration on the web form for the user control. Before we examine the register directive and the control declaration, let me go ahead and add the standard ASP.NET button control to this web form from the toolbox. So we just added the button control, and if you examine the declaration for the button control, pay attention to these two things. ASP, this is called as the tag prefix, and button is the tag name. Okay, since a button is a standard ASP.NET Server control, the tag prefix is ASP. Okay, just like how the standard ASP.NET controls have a tag prefix and a tag name, user controls also have a tag prefix and tag name in their declaration. So where are these tag prefix and tag name coming from? These are actually coming from the register directive. And what is this register directive? Basically, this register directive registers this user control, the calendar user control, with this web form. Okay, and this register directive is having three important attributes here. Okay, source specifies the source for the user control. Since the user control is present in the root directory of this web application project, we just have the name of the control there. And then the tag name is calendar user control, and that's what we have specified here. And the tag prefix is UC1, and that's what we are specifying here. Now, if this tag prefix doesn't make sense to you, if you want to change it to your choice, you can do so. For example, let me change this to Prajim. So if I change the tag prefix in the register directive, then in the control declaration I have to change it accordingly. Okay, so with this change, let me go ahead and run the application by pressing Ctrl F5. Now we should be able to use that user control, the calendar user control, on this web form. So I can click on the calendar user control, select a date that gets populated, and is working as expected. Alright, now let's say if I want to use this calendar user control on multiple web forms, then on each and every web form where I want to use this calendar user control, do I have to have this register directive? Yes, you have to. But if we register this user control in web.config file of the project, then we don't have to have this register directive on each and every web form. Let's see how to register a user control within web.config file of that project. To do that, we use the pages and controls element within system.web. Let's do that quickly. So I'm going to get rid of this register directive from there, and then within web.config file I'm going to add pages, and then within pages we're going to add controls, and then the add element. Okay, and we need to specify three attributes here: source, tag name, and tag prefix. So source, okay, so where is this calendar user control present? It's present within the root directory of this web application project, so I'm going to specify the root directory using the tilde symbol / calendar user control.ascx. And similarly, we need to specify the tag name, that's going to be calendar user control, and tag prefix, that's going to be Prajim. Okay, so we have done the declaration within web.config file. Now let's go to webform2.aspx. Okay, so since now I have the control declaration within web.config file, I think this should be fine at this point of time. So let me save that and let me run this now by pressing Ctrl F5. Now we will get an error. Okay, we'll get a runtime error. Look at this, when I builded this, I didn't get a build error, but I get a runtime error. And look at the error message here. The page webform2.aspx cannot use the user control calendar user control.ascx because it is registered in web.config file and lives in the same directory as the page. So the user control and the page where we are using this one, that's on webform2. So both of these are actually present in the same directory. And it cannot happen when this user control is being registered in web.config file. Okay, don't worry, that's not a code problem, it's by design. This is due to an internal design consideration for performance reasons. Okay, and how do we solve this problem? To solve this problem, simply move this calendar user control to a different folder. In real-time projects, what we actually do is user controls will reside in their own folders. For example, we'll give them a meaningful name like user controls. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So to this project, I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to call that user controls. So all my user controls are going to stay within this folder. So I'm going to move this user control into that folder. So this calendar user control now is in user controls folder. So this web form is in a different folder and this user control is in a different folder. But then we need to update that within web.config file. So the path has changed. So I'm going to say the calendar user control is actually within user controls folder. Okay, so with that change, let me build the solution and let's run this web form too. Now we should not get that error anymore. Okay, so we should be able to, click on the image, select a date, and everything works fine. Okay, now if you remember in the previous session, we didn't use the user control. Instead, we used that image button, calendar, and button control, everything on this webform1.aspx. And when I run this webform1.aspx and when I select a date from the calendar control, look at this. When I select a date and then when I click this button control, we retrieve that and print it on the web form. But how are we doing that? Since I have this text box, image button, and calendar, everything within the web form, it's very easy for me to retrieve the selected date from the text box using the text property of the text box control. But now when I'm using the calendar user control, look at this, calendar user control has actually encapsulated the text box, image button, and calendar control, all of these inside that user control, and that user control is now actually used on this webform2.aspx. Okay, now look at this, on the design I have this problem. That's because this calendar user control is not properly cased, so that works fine there. Alright, so all that text box, button control, and the image button, they are encapsulated within this calendar user control, and that calendar user control is used on this web form. Now when I have a button control here as well, so when I click that button, I want to retrieve the selected date from this control. So this entire thing now is one control. So how do I get the date from that control? There is no way for me at the moment. Okay, so to do that, we have to actually expose that date as a property from the control. So I'm going to go to this calendar control there, and I'm going to expose a property. Now where is this date, the selected date, present? The selected date is going to be present in this text date text box. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to provide a public property here. Okay, just like how web forms can have properties and methods, a user control also can have properties and methods. So I'm going to specify a property. I'm going to call this selected date property, and the type is going to be string. I'm going to make this a get and set property. So the get property will return the date from that text box. So txt date dot text. Okay, and then if somebody wants to set the value, set the date, they can use the set property. So I'm going to say txt date dot text is equal to value, whatever value they set, we are using that value to assign the text property of this text box control. That's the only change that I have to do. So let me go ahead and build this. So build succeeded. Now let's go to the webform 2.aspx where we have used this calendar control. Now what I basically can do is, so if I say, if you look at the ID of that calendar control on webform 2, what's the ID? It is calendar user control 1. So I'm going to copy that. We don't have to have this. So calendar user control 1 dot, look at that, there should be a property called selected date, and look at the return type of that, it's a string property. So I simply can say response dot write whatever date we have selected. Okay, so with that, if we go ahead and run now, we should be able to select the date, and then once I click on the button, that property is going to return the selected date from that calendar user control. So I get that date as expected. Now we are retrieving that dynamically, but then look at this, when I go to webform 2.aspx, I flip this to design mode, and then I right click on that, go to the properties window, and look at this, I can also have the selected date property here. For some reason it's not refreshed here, but let me go to the source mode here and then type selected date. Okay, for some reason it's not updated. Let me clean the solution and rebuild this. So I'm going to clean solution. I'm going to rebuild the solution again. Okay, let's flip to the design mode. Let's right click, go to the properties. We should see selected date there. Look at this, for some reason it's not showing up, but we're able to use that here. Selected date is the property. So let me copy that. This could be an issue with Visual Studio itself, and let me set selected date is equal to maybe 01/01/2013, and let me run this now. When we load the web form, that date should actually be selected within that calendar user control. So I'm just waiting for that. Look at that, it's selected. For some reason it's not showing up. Let me close Visual Studio and reopen that once again. So I'm going to right click on that, run as administrator, because many a times if Visual Studio is behaving in an unexpected way, just close it and reopen it. It should solve most of the problems. Okay, so let me now actually flip to the design mode and then go to the properties window. Look at that, it shows the selected date right now there. Okay, so that was an issue with Visual Studio, why it wasn't showing the first time. But then there is another issue here with user controls. Look at this, we have set the the selected date property in the HTML source or using the designer, the properties window here. But then is it setting the date within the text box control? No, it's not. Again, that's a limitation, because if you look at this, if I have text, for example the button control, if I change the text there to click, immediately the button control changes its text. Okay, similarly I'm setting the property of selected date to this one 1/1/2013, but is that shown in the text box there? It's not. Okay, again that's a design, that's by design, and there are two ways to solve that issue. Okay, we can create a custom control instead of user control if you want that behavior, or we can compile the user control into a DLL. Now when I compile this project, this user control, calendar user control, is not compiled into its own DLL. Instead it will be compiled into the project's assembly. Okay, but if we compile this user control into its own DLL, okay, then we should be able to have this value, whatever you change in the property, in the HTML or using the properties window, should be reflected there in the control. We'll see how to do that in a later video session. Okay, in the next video session we'll actually discuss about adding events to our calendar user control. On this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.